Now, let's get back. We were talking last time about changing the credit policy. Why would we loosen our credit? What was the goal of loosening the credit? Did we just do it for the hell of it because we like bad debt?
Help more attractive.
To increase sales, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do that to increase sales. And we have shown all these things that are going to happen as a result, or that's what we're getting ready to do. But we need to now calculate what's going to happen under the new scenario. And remember, in finance, what we're interested in is the incremental impact, and we'll get to that here in a second. Okay, let's talk about the amount of the discounts that we're going to have to, the expense of the discounts. And so our terms were 110 net 30. And so after within the first 10 days, we would have a 1% discount. Now we're changing it to 210 net 40. And so we're ending up with this 0.02 here is that 2%. So that's changed. And then the next number is the annual amount of sales. Our annual amount of sales was 400 million. Now we are projecting them to be 530 million. And so that number has also changed. And that last number has also changed. I think 40 or 50% were taking the discount beforehand. Now 60% are. Why would that percentage have gone up? Why would more people be taking the discount now? What's more attractive to you, a 1% or a 2% discount? A 2% discount. If you see that your favorite shirt's on sale for 5% off, you might not go out there and act on it, but if you see that it's 10% off, maybe you do. And that's why that proportion of of orders taking the discount has gone up. Does that make sense? Okay, so now 60% of our sales are taking advantage of the discount. So our new amount of the discounts, when you do that math, is 6.36 million, and so that comes out to roughly 6 million. And you'll see why I'm doing the roughly thing when we get to the next slide. Now, our new days sales outstanding. So it's changed. It was, I think, 21 days. Yeah, it was 21 days, and now it's 24 days. So let's see why that is. Now we've got 60% of people taking advantage of that 10 days, but now we've got 20% paying in 40 days and 20% paying in 50 days. And so that's going to bring us out to 24 days. In other words, our day sales outstanding, also known as our day sales and receivables or average collection period, has increased by 3 days. So our new accounts receivable carrying costs. Our days sales outstanding is 24. What's in the parentheses? What would be a name for that? The 530,000 over 365. I'll get you started. It's average. Okay, so what's 530 million? That's our new estimate of annual sales, right? And so if we take that and divide by 365, why do we divide by 365? Yeah, the days in the year, right? And so what you've got there, 530 million divided by 365, is your average credit sales per day. So we're taking the 24 days sales outstanding multiplied by the average days credit sales per day. Those two things multiplied together give us our accounts receivable. And then to get our carrying costs, we multiply by the variable cost portion, which we said is 70%. That hasn't changed any. And then we multiply by 0.2, which is the carrying cost for receivables. Now, we talked about it last time, can anyone tell me why we are only concerned with the variable cost portion of our accounts receivable? Yeah. So remember, we're looking at incremental stuff. And the incremental amount of money that I've actually had to put out to get those accounts receivable is only the variable cost portion. So that's why we're multiplying here by 0.7. And then we're multiplying by 0.2 because it's 20% cost of that money. And so when we do that math out, we come out to around $5 million. And then they told us that they're going to reduce credit analysis and collection expense by $3 million, but the bad debt will rise to 6%. What was the bad debt percentage beforehand? Do you remember? I think it was 2.5%. So it was 2.5%, so that 0.06 was 0.025. The 530 million, what was it previously? Yeah, 400 million. And then let's see, what else we got there? Okay, so we multiply that out and it gives us about 32 million bucks. And so when we went from our old bad debt expense was 10 million, now we're up to 32 million. But you know what, by golly, we saved 3 million bucks by not enforcing our credit policy or looking at people to make sure that they made good, that they were credit worthy. Does that sound like a good decision to you? That sounds a little shady to me. Okay, so now we're going to put all this together and see what the impact is on net income. And so if I had to do this slide again, I would actually change it and put the effect of the policy change out at the end, because of course that's the incremental part that we're interested in. Our sales are going from 400 to 530. That's an increase of 130. Our discounts are going from 2 to 6, so that's an increase of 4. So we have to subtract our discounts out, so our net sales are going from 398 up to 524, so that's a net change of 126. Now, I want you to, on this next line where it says production including overhead, I want you to change that. It should be production costs excluding overhead, because after all, we kept the fixed costs out. Does that make sense? And so scratch out that including overhead. That's variable cost stuff. And here's how I know that for sure. Because 400 times the 0.7, which was the variable cost ratio, would give us that 280. That's how I know that for sure. So our production costs are going to go from 280 to 371. Why are production costs going up? Simply because we're selling more stuff. Does that make sense? And I don't have a problem with our production costs going up in line with our sales. That's not a problem at all. So the effect of the policy change there is that our costs are going to go up. Those costs are going to go up by 91. And so we can see our profit before credit costs takes us, we will go from 118 to 153, which is a up of 35. So far, does this sound like a good decision to you? Yeah, so far it's looking pretty good. But we've got to take account of the bad things that happen as a result of doing this. And those would be our credit-related costs. So what are our costs of carrying our accounts receivable? Well, we're going from 3 to 5. And so that's going to increase our costs by 2, our credit costs. Our credit analysis collections, we were spending $5 million a year on that. Now we're only going to be spending 2, so we're dropping 3 there. But our bad debt losses have gone way up from 10 up to 32. So that's an increase of 22. And so when I look at all that stuff, so I start with 35, and then I subtract out 21, that brings me down to 14. So now, before taxes, there's an increase in our profit of 14. Apparently, the tax rate is 50%. How do I know that?
Net profit, or the
When
taxes
you
are
look at
7.
the net income, it's only half of the pre-tax profit, and so that means we must have paid half in taxes. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but I think it may. So when I do that, that actually cuts my net income from 100, or it leaves me with 57 in net income versus 50 to begin with. We said up here, going from 118 to 153 looked pretty good. Going from 50 to 57, does it look as appealing? No, it's not nearly as big a percentage. And the next thing I want to point out is that the net income under the current policy is known with certainty. Can we say that about the net income under the new policy? No, we can't. And so some things might happen. Number one, maybe the sales increases aren't as much as we had predicted. Number two, maybe the bad debt is going to cost us more than we had anticipated. Number three, maybe more people will take the discount than we had anticipated. Why does all this come into play? Because those things are all swags. They're just scientific wild-ass guesses. How often do you think these things come out to be exactly true? Seldom. How often do you think they come out to be better than we expect? Seldom. So if it just from my personal experience in this life, what I would tell you is that 57 is probably wishful thinking. And in order to get that boost, we're going to have to take the risk that's associated with those forecasted values. And the question that you're going to have to answer in your gut is that additional money worth the risk that we're taking? And you've got to figure that out for yourself. Questions? Okay, that is the end of credit. Now we are on to inventory. So this whole unit is over working capital management, and we know that's working capital is current assets minus current liabilities, and we know that current assets include inventory. So if we finish this discussion and we hadn't discussed inventory, we would not be doing a thorough discussion. So that's why we're going to talk about inventory. Now, this statement I took directly from the crazy reading, and that is that inventory is dynamic. What does dynamic mean? Yeah, it's changing. It requires constant consideration of internal and external factors in order for us to plan what is our optimal inventory level. And by the way, this is all forecasting stuff, right? You hold inventory for future events. And so once again, we've got forecasting risk involved here. Well, let's talk about this whole dynamic thing. What happened to the supply of semiconductors or computer chips during the pandemic? Yeah, it went way down. First of all, did any of us really see the pandemic coming? No. Do you think semiconductor companies are like, oh wow, we're going to have a pandemic coming, we better get some more raw materials, we better create some extra? No, nobody saw that coming. And so we know that these situations can arise. Now, businesses respond. By the way, a shortage of supply, an increase in demand, what happens to the price of those things? Yeah, it's got to go up. Now, as a greedy capitalist at this point, what do you do to your production capacity to take advantage of that? Yeah, you're going to increase it. And so what did they do? They started making chips like crazy. Now, eventually, the demand for those chips, which was being driven by work from home and lots of other things, went away. What happens now to the inventory of chips? What would you guess has happened? Yeah, they've got way too much. And what's that doing to the price of chips? Yeah, they're going down. There's a really good example of how dynamic inventory could be. Now, that we've got our internal factors, which is stuff that we can control, that pandemic, that's an external factor that's well beyond our control, and we couldn't even predict it. There are some external factors that we can predict. For instance, we have a reduction in the size of our labor force worldwide. If you just add all the labor forces, China's decreasing, Japan's decreasing, the US is decreasing, Europe is decreasing, even worse, Korea, all those countries. And that's something, that's an external factor, but it's something we can predict. And then there's these crazy things that just come out of nowhere, like the pandemic or Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Okay, questions so far? Yeah.
So after the pandemic, has there been like a lot of shift? Have a lot of companies decided to hold more inventory, or has it kind of changed?
Okay, so this is a good question. He's asking, has the pandemic changed how people view their inventory? And even outside of things like semiconductors, the answer is absolutely yes. Before the pandemic, we basically depended on the supply chain for as close to just-in-time inventory as we could get by with. What's just-in-time? What's the idea on that?
Get it when you need it.
Yeah, the stuff shows up exactly when I need it. And as long as you have reliable, robust supply chains, you can do that. Where was most of the stuff coming from? China. And where did the trouble start with the pandemic? China. And what did that do to China's ability to fulfill those orders? Yeah. And then you've got boats coming over here from China. In the beginning, do you think we were kind of circumspect about, yeah. And so you've got these supply chains that have basically, for the longest time, we've been running JIT because we had increasing globalization, we had increasing supply chain efficiency, increasing supply chain reliability. And then two things have happened. Number one, the pandemic. And number two is the beginnings of what we're seeing as deglobalization. And so you've started to see United States and China putting tariffs and export bans on various things. And so that's going to have an impact on those supply chains. You've got Britain leaving the EU. That's going to have an impact on supply chains. And as a result, because we no longer have these efficient, reliable, robust supply chains, what does that mean for the amount of inventory that we have to hold?
It needs to be larger.
Yeah, you got to hold more. And we're going to see that's not something we actually want to do. We would prefer not to. Excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Other questions? Okay. So, what's inventory? It sounds like a dumb question, but I want to hit on the first word here. Inventory is an idle stock. What does idle mean? That's not doing anything. It's just sitting there. It's not like a production machine. It's just sitting there, not doing anything. Do we like having our money invested in things that aren't doing anything? Absolutely not. And it's a stock of physical goods. So I'm going to talk today about my Etsy store. I'm not encouraging any of you to shop there, but it's going to be an example here. But before I tried to do Etsy, I tried to do the print-on-demand t-shirts. You guys know about print-on-demand? And so you can guess I've got a bunch of smart-ass stuff to put on t-shirts, right? And so the way that works is the t-shirt does not get printed until someone orders it, right? And so my inventory would have been zero because I'm not even holding the raw materials, the t-shirts and the inks and all that, right? Someone else is holding that. So my inventory would have been zero. Now I'm in this, I'll show you my new business. And by the way, this is just for fun. I'm not planning to get rich or anything. Okay, so first thing I'll tell you about Etsy or any of these things is that all the good English names have been taken, so I went with something German. And you guys know about Jaeger, so I threw in Falcon in front of it because my last name, the meaning is Falcon. There we go. Okay, so here's what I'm making. I've got this 3D printer. And by the way, I treat myself once a year to something around $1,000, right? And it's after I finish teaching this extraordinarily difficult class that I don't have to teach, so they give me money for that, and then I spend part of it. Okay, so I went out and I bought a 3D printer, and I've just been playing around with it and doing weird stuff. And then I thought, you know what? Just for fun, because my relevant experience is, what, a quarter century old now, 20 to 25 years old. I'm going to get out there and try to come up with some new examples, and this is how I'm going to do that. Now, 3D printing, how it works. you buy a spool of filament, which is just long spaghetti looking plastic on a reel. And then it melts the plastic and creates these things. And so when do you think I'm actually going to print these things out other than for pictures? Yeah, when it gets ordered. And so I'm not going to print anything, so my finished goods inventory is 0, except for the things that I printed out to make pictures of, right? Okay, so what kind of inventory do I have? Well, I've got the filament, and additionally, I am including these little tea light things. They're LED. And my purpose in including the LED tea light is to keep jerks from putting candles in these and then starting fires and suing me for burning their house down, right? And I say very clearly in the instructions, don't put a freaking candle in this thing. It's made out of plastic. Are you an idiot, right? That sort of thing. Anyway, so what have I got there? Well, I've got raw materials, and then I've also got, basically it's someone else's finished good that I'm buying that I include with my item. Okay, now, let's talk about my thing that I'm buying here. These are my little tea lights. And I can buy them in a 24 pack, and it's going to cost me 42 cents a piece. Or I could buy them in a 50 pack, and it costs me 36 cents a piece. Or I can buy them in a 100 pack, and it's going to cost me 30 cents a piece. And so we're going to see that this is actually going to come into our thinking later on when we're deciding how much inventory to hold. I was also, so my wife took the pictures for me, and she says, okay, we've been using the candles during this process. She says, maybe we should replace the candles in these before we ship them out. And I said, okay. And so I thought, well, wait a minute, what if we could just replace the battery? And so I actually looked up the battery. In most cases, the batteries that are included with this thing actually cost more than to buy the little candle itself. Isn't that silly? Anyway, so this is going to be the example that I'll come back to after I've talked about my other industry examples. Any questions? By the way, I haven't sold anything yet. Okay, so held in various forms, awaiting packing. Well, that would be your finished goods inventory, right? The stuff awaiting packing. The stuff awaiting processing we call work in process. Would be WIP, or also you might think of raw material being something that is awaiting processing, and they use the word transformation. I think that's pretty much the same as processing. Use for sale at a future point in time. This isn't for today. This is stuff that's sitting idle in anticipation of future need. Now, if you look at basically any organization that's involved in basically anything, they are going to have some sort of inventory. The only thing I can think of that's not that way would be things like apps. I'm not clever enough to write an app, or I would, because I love the idea that I have no physical inventory at all. I don't have to worry about shipping it. I mean, it's pretty sweet, right? That's one of the few businesses I can think of where you don't actually have inventory. Now, do we want to carry inventory? You say, inventory, well, yeah. Did we want to extend credit for people? No, we didn't want to extend credit for people. It leads to this accounts receivable carrying cost, plus it leads to potential defaults. Accounts receivable is a current asset. It has a carrying cost. Do you think maybe inventory has a carrying cost to it too? Of course it does. And we're going to see there's a whole lot more than just the carrying cost that makes us think that carrying inventory is a bad deal. We would prefer to avoid it if we could. And that's why we see actually this increase in inventories that people are having to hold now as a result of deglobalization and the pandemic. We're seeing that that's actually a bad thing. Overall social welfare is reduced because we're having to bear these extra costs. So, what are the inventory essential characteristics? We've already basically talked about that first bullet point. It could be in a complete state or an incomplete state. When you buy something like my filament, that's a raw material. And then you've got what's called WIP, or work in process. That's stuff that's had some work done to it but isn't completed yet. And then you've got finished goods. So all of that's considered inventory. And that's just talking about the goods. Do you think it's possible that we would have to have other things that are necessary to make things work that wouldn't be part of our finished product? Do you think a factory needs light bulbs? Yeah. Do they go into the final product? No. Do you think a factory needs toilet paper? Yeah. Do you think it goes into the final product? Hopefully not, right? Unless it's a toilet paper factory. So we're going to see that we call those things rope, soap, and dope. Have you ever heard this expression? Rope, soap, and dope? And so those are the things that you have to keep in your inventory to make the business work that don't go into the actual product itself. Rope, soap, and dope. Okay. Now, all of our inventory resources have economic value. And we say that the definition of an asset is something that will provide economic value to the firm at some point in the future. And so inventory fits our definition of assets. And we're going to see that that means that there are certain responsibilities we have regarding assets that we have to do, or regarding inventory, because they are an asset of the firm. By the way, who does the inventory belong to? What's the goal of financial management? Maximize shareholder wealth. The inventory belongs to the shareholders. I'm going to try to hit on that as often as I can, so you guys get out of here, you realize that it's the shareholders that you're working for. Okay, so we've talked about raw materials. I really don't need to hit on that anymore, but I will talk about consumables. A consumable is something that would not show up perhaps on a parts breakdown, but is needed for the production of the item. So I used to work in a factory where we made truck suspensions, and our raw materials were steel, and we would get these big steel sheets in, and we would cut them into shapes, and then we would bend them, and then we would weld them together. And in that process, there were two consumables that we used. Number one were the nozzles for the plasma cutters. Plasma is where you strip the electrons off of atoms, and then you shoot them at high speed at something, and it basically blows apart the very basis of matter. It turns it from a solid into something else, and then just momentarily, so it breaks apart. And so these plasma cutters have these brass nozzles. Well, given what you're shooting through them, they erode, and they don't last forever, so you have to keep changing them out. Therefore, in our process, those nozzles were consumables. They were consumed in the process, but they were not a part listed on the finished product. We also had welding wire. We used metal inert gas welding. So we had helium, we had argon, I think. It's been so long I've forgotten. But basically we had these gases that had to be used while we were doing the welding. Those gases were consumables. And then you could argue that the welding wire was a raw material, but it didn't actually show up on the bill of materials, so we considered it to be a consumable as well. So those are consumables, different than raw materials. And then we have WIP. WIP, if you walk into a factory and you look around the floor, usually stuff sitting at the different workstations, that stuff hasn't been completed, and it's requiring additional work before it's completed. That's WIP. And then of course we've got finished goods. And you may find those finished goods at these three places. Number one, at the plant, awaiting to be shipped out. Now you guys in the business strategy game, do you have any finished goods at your plant? You guys don't know. It's actually in the player's guide. It says straight up, no finished goods at the plant. Finished goods are held at the distribution center, right? And so that's your warehouse. That's going to be where those things are shipped out from. And so that's where we're going to see finished goods. And then finally, something else that's included in our inventory is any inventory that we have title to. What's title? Yeah, ownership. And this is where this concept of free on board comes from, or it comes into play. You may have never actually seen it written out, but what it will say on the paperwork is FOB. Have you ever seen FOB on paperwork for something? FOB, if I ship something out of Springfield and I say it's FOB Springfield, that means the title to those goods transfers to the buyer as soon as it leaves my facility here in Springfield. But let's say I'm shipping it to Peoria and I ship it FOB Peoria. That means the title transfers when it reaches the customer's dock. What does that mean? I'm going to have higher inventory if I am sending the stuff FOB to the customer's location, because everything in transit will also be included on my inventory. But more importantly, who's responsible for that inventory on the road? If I ship it FOB Springfield and it gets out here on I-44 and there's a big pile up, who's responsible? Yeah, the customer is. But if I ship it FOB Peoria and it gets out here on I-44 and there's a big pile up, who's responsible now? Yeah. And so I would always prefer to ship my stuff FOB me, right? And then it turns over the responsibility to the customer, reduces the amount of inventory that I've got. However, when I am buying stuff from someone else, how would I prefer it to work? Yeah, once again, I want it to be FOB me, right? I want them to hold that on their inventory, because as soon as it leaves their dock, otherwise it becomes part of my inventory. If it's not in one person's inventory, it's in the other person's inventory. And then also, if something happens to that stuff along the way, I want them to be responsible, not me. So that's how the whole FOB thing works. And by the way, that's part of the terms everybody agrees to up front, just like the credit terms. Okay, any questions so far? Yeah.
What was the name of the place you did suspensions at?
It was called Hendrickson Trailer Suspension System.
Okay, I was gonna say, because all the items you were talking about, I think all those to a different place that does suspensions.
Ah.
In Nixa, called Cush Suspensions.
Okay.
And then the other one was, has there
Kush.
ever,
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
the other question was, have there ever been like any deals between like a customer and supplier where they share a liability for something over in transit, or is it usually just one way or the other?
So I've never heard of the shared liability thing. Usually you want a clean break. Now, we were not the only trailer suspension. There was Meritor was another one that was, but I think I've never heard of this Cush, so either they're relatively new to the game or they're relatively small.
I think they're just based out of Nixa.
Okay. So Hendrickson that I used to work for, they've got 5 or 6 plants, including in Canada and Europe and places like that. And so if you're following a truck down the road, I know this is not something that would have even occurred to you before, but just look at the back of the truck. A lot of times there will be a little placard on the back that says that this suspension by, and it will have the name of the company on it. And so when I drive up behind trucks, knowing that the differences I know between these companies kind of changes my following distance, because I know some of them are more reliable than others. Okay, other questions? So, why do companies hold raw material inventory? I'm going to use my new business to answer to talk about the first one, and that is to handle variations in production demand. As long as these variations are below my production capacity, then all I've got to do is have the raw material on hand. And so right now, my orders of 0 are well below my production capacity. But what if I were to get orders? I would need the raw materials to do that. And undoubtedly, this kind of crap is a seasonal business, right? So right now, people may be looking to buy tchotchkes for their fireplace for Christmas or whatever, are they going to be doing that in April? Probably not. And so when we're going to hit these big seasonal times, I need to have more of my filament on hand. I need to have more of those little lights on hand. Do you think maybe I would let my inventory go down during the summertime? Probably so. Now, there may be other demands, right? There could be some sort of demand that's based, what if I come up with something really fun and I get it out there and it goes viral? Let's say it's a fake dog poop that glows, right? I could just imagine that going viral. And at that point, if I'm going to start out a new product like that and I think it's going to be really great, what should I do with my raw material inventory? Kind of boost it up, right? Does that make sense? And so the first reason would be to handle variations in production demand. And then the second one was we actually just talked about was the cyclical or seasonal demand. Think about for people that make Christmas candy. When do you think that candy actually gets made? Has to be sometime before Christmas. But do you think you could make it a year in advance? Why not? Yeah, it'll go bad. And so basically you've got this big crush period in which you have to make all this candy. Now, what does that mean you have to have plenty on hand of before you start the big crush production? Sugar, for one, right? Chocolate, all sorts of stuff that you might have to have additional stuff. And so what we're going to see is that these people will be building up their inventories through late spring, early summer, and then they're actually going to start producing this stuff. And of course, there's also Halloween candy. Hopefully they're not just making Christmas candy. And so we see these seasonal fluctuations would lead to a seasonal change in the demand for our raw materials. Then we have expected price increases and quantity discounts. Let's talk about the quantity discounts first. You remember when I was showing you the tea lights, the more that I buy of them, the cheaper they are. And so you might say, well, wait a minute, why don't you just buy the ones with the cheapest unit price? Because then I have to hold those things in inventory. And we just discussed that we don't like holding things in inventory. And so you got to balance these things out. And then there is expected, we'll get back to number 3 here in a second. Expected price increases. It was so funny when I worked in plastics because plastic resin, the price is fairly volatile. And the reason it's fairly volatile is because it's tied to oil price, because oil and natural gas are your raw materials for making plastics. And so when oil prices would go through the roof, we would just start waiting for the calls from our suppliers telling us that the price was going to go up. Now, during that time, it might make sense for us to start buying some of these things because there's always a lag between oil price going up and the price of the plastic going up. It was strange because we actually had salespeople from these plastic companies that would call us and tell us, hey, the price of that stuff is about to go up from $4 a pound to $4.50 a pound. Would you guys like to buy some before the price changes? Now, is that what the company would really have them be doing? No, wouldn't the company rather wait? Now, this is another example of people being scumbags. Why was the salesperson pushing us to go ahead and buy a bunch of this stuff? Yeah, commission, right? Now, they would have actually been better off to have waited and let us take the price increase because then they would be getting the same percentage of a higher amount of money. But by telling us that we needed to build up our inventory, they were able to get the money sooner. And so it might be perfectly rational for they have to have a heck of a discount rate, but it might be perfectly rational that they would rather take the cut on $4 than $4.50 a pound. Okay, what about economies of scale in procurement? Do you think it costs us to place an order? So my crazy little store, if you buy one item from me, the shipping is $4.99. If you buy 2 items from me, the shipping is $4.99. If you buy $35 or more, the shipping is free. And so we see that inbound freight is one of those order costs. The inbound freight is one of the order costs. And we're going to get around to talking about what people include in these order costs and how some of it may be a bit squishy. But it makes sense if I'm going to have to use, so like these tea lights, if I'm using 24 of them per week, does it make sense for me to place an order every week? No. Okay, now, what about reduced transit costs and transit times? Now, I'm going to have to define a term for you here. Maybe some of you already know what it is. Do you know what LTL is? Any truckers in here? No truckers, I'm shocked. Okay, so LTL means less than load. Less than load. And so if you have a pallet that you want sent somewhere, but you don't have enough to make up an entire truckload, you can ship it less than truckload, LTL. And one of the companies that does this is a freight company called Saia. We used to use those when I was in the oil field. And FedEx Ground, or FedEx Freight has a similar setup. They will actually come and pick up a pallet, and then they will take it to one of their basically distribution centers. Well, not distribution centers, a hub. And what they'll do, let's say that your pallet is going to Toledo. They will have a semi-trailer size spot marked off on the floor that says Toledo. And when they get your pallet, they will put it in that footprint. And when they get enough stuff that will fit an entire semi-trailer, what do you think happens? Yeah, they fill a trailer and send it to Toledo. Now, what does that mean for you as someone shipping? Are you guaranteed a delivery time? No. And so if yours is the first pallet to wind up in the footprint for Toledo, you might be waiting a while. What if yours is the last pallet? Boop. It goes almost immediately, right? And so there's this huge variability in transit time. On average, your transit times are going to be lower. Also, your transit times are going to be higher for less than load. Transit times are going to be on average higher for less than load. But what if you could ship an entire trailer? Do we have to wait for this thing to fill up? No. Do you think it's cheaper to arrange for one shipper to be on a truck or for many shippers to be on a truck? I think it's cheaper to arrange for just one truck to come pick your stuff up, right? It doesn't even have to go through their sorting system there at their hub. And so if you can order entire truckloads of stuff at the same time, then you can do two things. Number one, you can shorten down the amount of time it takes to get to you. And number two, you can reduce the cost per unit for the shipping. What's the downside to ordering an entire truckload? Yeah, it's a lot. And where's it going to go once it gets into your system? Yeah, it goes into your inventory. And we got through saying we really don't want to carry inventory. So once again, it's this balancing game. We're balancing these things off against having to carry the inventory. And then we have these long lead time, high demand materials. Have you guys ever been out, and I'm pretty sure you have, you've been heading down the highway and your lights hit one of the road signs and you notice that the road sign basically looks like it lights up. That's not just your ordinary run-of-the-mill reflective stuff. There is a pigment that goes into the plastic that they use to make the letters and the arrows, and that pigment and the pigment that goes into that plastic is made in Germany. And it's only made once per year because it's very potent stuff and the worldwide demand is not that great. So this company in Germany, they've got other businesses, but once a year they set up basically a bench top or a lab situation where they just create this stuff in the lab and then they ship it out to the people who already have it on order. Now, what does that mean? If I think in any way, shape, or form I'm going to have that kind of work in the coming year where I would need that pigment, what do I have to do? Yeah, I've got to order it early and I've got to keep it in my inventory. And so this stuff we might be expecting to keep in the inventory for a year before we would even use it. By the way, it doesn't go bad. Here's the other thing you need to know. It's shipped in these 1 liter jars. And that 1 liter jar cost around $30,000. And those are $19.99 prices. So imagine what this, let's just say $60,000. Now, so all of our other pigments and stuff, which were maybe a few dollars a pound, we just had them out on shelves in the warehouse. Do you think we had that stuff just out on a shelf in the warehouse? No. No, it's family-owned business. The plant that I worked at was connected to the corporate headquarters, and there was a safe in the CEO's office. And if you needed that, guess what you had to do? You had to go up and you say, hey Rick, I need and I even forget the name of the stuff. And he'd say, okay, and then of course, you turn your back so you're not watching him do the combination, and he hands you the jar of stuff. But you know what? I'll bet Rick remembers who he hands it to, right? And so we would very carefully weigh that, and then we would weigh the jar when we got done to make sure that we were managing that inventory well. Do you think people would be stupid enough to steal something like that? Yeah. A new worker, you show that to him, you say, yeah, that jar's worth $60,000. So what does the idiot do? They steal it. Now, they haven't thought very far down the line, because do you think people are just out scouring eBay looking for such things? Absolutely not. So what did this mean? It meant that we always had to have, basically, we kept around a liter of this stuff. We kept $60,000 just because we knew it would take basically a year to get that if we ordered it at the wrong time. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's talk about when we hold finished goods inventories. I just got through watching a video that really does a good job at CNBC of explaining this top one, market size, location, and supply chain design. Let's compare 2 different businesses here. Let's talk about Amazon and Target. Both of them have online fulfillment. Amazon is huge, and the demand for them, by the way, what percentage of the online sales market do you think that they have? It's huge. It's what?
40.
Yeah, it's real close. It's like 37.8%. What percentage do you think Target has? 2.8%. Damn, you're on fire. Okay, 2.8%. Did you watch the video?
No.
Sweet, he's psychic. Okay, come by my office. We'll get rich on the stock market. Okay, so Target is pushing a much, much smaller volume of goods than Amazon. Would it make sense for Target to have their finished goods set up exactly like Amazon? No, it's not going to make sense for them to put a Target distribution center in every place that has an Amazon distribution center. So do you know what Target's response is to this whole thing? Where are they keeping their finished goods? In the stores. And when someone orders, by the way, someone here works at Target? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, here's the question. When you ship from store, where does it go? Does it go directly to the customer?
It goes to FedEx, and then it goes to the customer.
Okay, so it goes to FedEx, it goes to the customer. So the thing that I was watching, they actually, in some parts of the country, because it turns out that the answer to number 1 is 2 different things for Target depending on the part of the country. Minnesota is where Target's from. Do you think Target's big in Minnesota? Yeah. And so in Minnesota, a lot of times what's happening is the stuff from the stores is not going directly to the customer unless they're just like really close. A lot of times it's actually going to like a mini distribution center where then it gets put together with the stuff that came off the shelves from the other stores, and then from there it gets sent out. And they said this is somehow a cost savings for them. But do you see that the fact that their market size is different, the fact that they have different locations, they're shipping to different locations perhaps, and then most importantly, the supply chain design is different. And so they are handling these things in different ways. So therefore, the amount and location of finished goods that they're holding is different. Now, let's talk about build to stock versus build to order. When you go to buy a car and you see all those cars on the lot, those were all built to stock. There wasn't a customer that ordered that particular vehicle, right? That's build to stock. Now, what's the problem with build to stock? When you go to look at a car lot to buy a new car, do you think they always have exactly what you want? No. And so you end up having to make a compromise. And that's why I never buy a new car. I haven't since 1995. Buy a new car off of the lot. I always order them. I'm a patient man. I'm willing to wait. Build to order, they're going to build it exactly as I want it. Now, which do you think creates more inventory, build to stock or build to order? Yeah, build to stock has to, right? You've got that stuff in inventory. I am a manufacturer's dream from an inventory perspective, because all they have to do is finish that car off and then they send it on its merry way toward me, as opposed to sitting on a lot for 30, 60, 90 days. And so build to stock, of course, is going to lead to higher inventories. When I was in the oil field, I was creating these safety valves that go down in the oil well. They're called subsurface safety valves. And most of them were custom jobs. And so, of course, those were all build to order. But we had one, the 78 double-aught 417. And, you know, you can tell it was important to me, or I wouldn't remember it after 25 years, right? 78 double-aught 417 was something that we sold a lot of. And so if we had a reduction in our custom orders and we thought it was just temporary to keep my guys busy, what would we do? We built some 78 double-aught 417s and put them on the shelf. As a result, what did that do to my inventory? My inventory went up. So in this point, what am I trading off? I'm trading off production efficiency and inventory. I want to keep my guys busy. By the way, do you think it's important more than just for money reasons to keep your people busy? What do people do when they're not kept busy?
Nothing good.
Nothing good. I'm not kidding. So the old expression is, your grandma probably said it, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And you may not believe in the devil, but if you've ever seen idle hands in the workshop, you start to believe, right? Because of the games these people do, and some of it's unsafe. Okay, so if I'm building a stock, I'm going to have a higher inventory. And then what about marketing campaigns? So I'm going to ask our target guy, do you guys ever get extra stuff in anticipation of a sale? Yeah, and so right now you guys are probably stocking up in anticipation of Christmas, which is going to start, what, Black Friday, really big? You guys are probably already, you've already got Valentine's crap. That's just sad. That's just so sad. Yeah. Okay, back to the story. So, in anticipation of these marketing campaigns, they're building up. Do you think manufacturers do the same thing? Yeah, the people that are building the stock that's now showing up at Target, they built that up a couple months ago probably in anticipation of this Black Friday marketing campaign. And so if you're heading into a marketing campaign, you definitely want more inventory, because what really pisses people off? When they go on Black Friday to get the $500 75-inch television and, yeah, not there. Okay, now local taxes and other government rules. So it may be more tax efficient to hold your inventory in one place versus another. If you've got a locality that taxes you based on your inventory versus one just across the state line that doesn't, wouldn't it make sense to have your warehouse, your finished goods warehouse, out of state? It might. And let's talk about local laws. Here's one of my favorite. In New Jersey, it's only legal to ship or to sell liquor online if the liquor ships from New Jersey. So it has to ship from a warehouse in New Jersey. Now imagine that the states around New Jersey do not have similar laws. Where would every liquor company choose to put their warehouse? New Jersey. Does that make sense? And so these laws and taxes can impact where we hold our finished goods. Let's talk about production lead times. If people, so I would be able to make a valve in 6 weeks. If someone was going to need one faster than that, the only way that I could get it to them is if I had it in stock. And so those long production lead times led me to hold stock in things like the 78 double lot 417, because that allowed me to pick up those sales for people whose demand time was less than my production lead time. And so the longer it takes you to make something, the more inventory you're going to have to hold. Getting back to my little business, the longest print time of any of my products is around 3 hours. I've got 1 to 3 days, according to the terms that I've put out there, I've got 1 to 3 days to fulfill the order and get it shipped. Do you think I'm going to hold any finished goods based on my production lead time? Not currently. Now, if I get to a point where my little shop is wildly successful, I may have to rethink that and make some stuff during slack time, so I'll be able to get stuff out to people within that 1 to 3 days. But for the time being, there's absolutely no reason for me to do that. And then we have speculative gains. Let's say that you're a gold mine. You're actually mining gold. What's the finished product of the gold mine? Gold, very good. Now, what do we know about prices of gold? Is it really steady? No, it fluctuates. What if you thought we were going into a period of increased prices for gold? What might you do? Yeah, you might work your people overtime, build up a little inventory, and take advantage of that new higher price when it comes out. We actually have a sort of example of this here in Springfield. Is everyone familiar with SRC? SRC is Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation, and what they do is they get engines and transmissions and rebuild them, mostly for agricultural equipment, but for some other stuff too. And here was the fun thing. These transmissions from this one particular piece of ag equipment, people didn't realize that if they turned it in, they could get a lot of money from it from what's called a core charge. Do you know what's a core charge, Mr. Crawford?
It's like if you're gonna fix an alternator on your vehicle, you buy the new one and they'll give you money back. You bring the old one in so they can repair it.
Yeah. And so basically, these farmers, instead of getting that core charge, that money back for the old broken transmission, they were basically just selling them for scrap. And so SRC, of course, that meant they had higher demand for these rebuilt transmissions than they had the transmissions to rebuild. And so they thought, well, hey, let's start calling around to junkyards and to see if anyone was stupid enough to send these things to junkyards. And sure enough, they started finding these transmissions in junkyards. And let's say that the core charge on the darn thing was $5,000. They could turn around and buy that same transmission out of the junkyard for $1,000. Now, we haven't yet got into the speculative gain thing, but what they figured out is they're really good at scouring junkyards and finding undervalued stuff. And so they actually started an entirely new business of scouring junkyards, buying stuff, and then holding it, waiting for the price to go up. So they actually buy scrap aluminum, scrap all sorts of stuff, and hold on to it in anticipation of the price going up. Now, as a believer in efficient markets, do I think that's even possible? I mean, you might win one week and lose the next, right? But on average, there's no way to do that. Apparently, however, SRC knows how to do this, and so they're actually buying this stuff and holding it. By the way, if we say speculative, is it a sure thing? No. Do you think SRC's ever lost money on one of these deals? Probably, right? Do you think the gold mine that built up extra inventory might have? Yeah. So if you think back to COVID, what did we assume was going to happen to the world economy?
Never recover.
Yeah, we expected everything just to go to crap, right? And so in such a situation, you might think, gold price is going to go way up. So what do? You put a bunch of gold in inventory, and then, things aren't so bad. Does the gold price go up as much as you'd anticipated? No, and so the speculative gains evaporate. And so anytime you see the word speculative, I want you to think gambling. And do people win at gambling? Sometimes. Do people lose at gambling? More often, right? Or they couldn't build those expensive casinos if people won more than they lost. Okay, so then we're going to talk about avoiding costs, such as ordering costs and stock out costs. Now let's talk about ordering costs. We discussed the inbound freight. People will also talk about the cost of issuing an order in procurement. And we had some stupid number like it cost $200 for every order that we placed. And here's how they came up with that order. They took the annual cost of our procurement department and they divided it by the number of orders. And so then they're saying, well, hey, orders cost $200 a piece. You guys need to make bigger orders. Now, what is that going to do to my cost per order if we don't fire any of the procurement people? All it's going to do is drive my cost per order up. You're not helping anything by doing that unless you lay off a procurement person. And so what kinds of ordering costs are there that actually do matter and do exist? We'll talk about the inbound freight's the big one, right? The inbound freight is an ordering cost. A lot of times you can get twice the amount for the same freight. Okay, so that's why we might go ahead and order. By the way, finished goods come from two places. I've been talking a lot about making stuff, but what else?
Wow, stuff that you
Yeah, stuff that you buy. So the stuff on the shelf at Target, does Target make that? No, of course not. And so we're also here talking about building up a finished goods inventory of stuff that you buy. Whoa, don't do that. Wake up. Okay, so too much inventory can be a sign of problems. First of all, could be supplier inefficiency or unreliability. The valves that I made had a single piston in them, and that piston had a piston rod. So it's just a long, thin rod. And this long, thin rod was made out of Inconel 718. Inconel 718 is a metal that is used in jet engines. So it's a very expensive, high nickel alloy. Now, here's the fun thing. These things had to be spray welded on the outside, and as you could guess, spray welding heats this thing up. So in order to get the properties back where they needed to be, we had to heat treat them. And when you heat stuff up, sometimes it has a tendency to bend. And so basically what we were doing was we were trying to make these things in-house, and we would end up with, we would take 12 of them out of the oven and 10 of them would look like French fries. And so then, so that was a big cost for us. And so we had a supplier, they said, oh yeah, we can do that. We can do that, no problem. And so we sent the work out to them and we ordered 12. How many of them do you think came out okay out of their process? 2. And they're like, no, we'll figure this out. And I'm like, okay. But in the meantime, what did I do? I placed a pretty big order, probably 6 times as big as I needed, because I knew I would only get really 1/6 of those items delivered in the amount of time that I was stipulating. And so there was a higher inventory there as a result because of their inefficiencies. So if you walked and you looked at my shelf, you might say, well, wait a minute, why are you carrying so many of these things? My answer would be, sometimes it takes them 3 months to get one right. What about bad quality? A lot of people don't realize that manufacturing processes don't always produce exactly what you want. And if the product is beyond salvation, it ends up being scrapped. And it's immediately written off, and it comes off the value of your inventory. Of course, it's going to hit you on the income statement. But what if you can rework that product? You could put some additional effort, maybe a few new parts into it, and then make it marketable. You'd want to do that because you're saving yourself the cost of scrapping it. However, in the meantime, all that stuff is sitting there in your inventory. And so the longer it takes you to rework the problem items, the more you're going to have in inventory. I'll give you an example. This one shocked me. If you were to picture in your head a Japanese car factory and ask yourself, what percentage of the cars coming off the line do you think didn't pass the final quality inspection and ended up in the rework area? What percentage is in your mind right now, knowing the Japanese? 12%. Any other guesses? What'd you say? 80. Once again, you're you're not close. But my point is this: there was like 37% of the vehicles coming off the line had something wrong with them that needed to be fixed. And so there was this, actually, it was indoors, it was right there in the factory, but at the end of the line, if it didn't pass quality inspection, they take it right over there and park it in the awaiting a rework parking lot. Well, guess what? Everything in that awaiting a rework parking lot has raw materials in it, it has parts in it, it has labor in it. All that value is sitting there and it's in your inventory. Now, some of the rework was easier than others, and it was funny. One of the problems is that the trunk lid wouldn't fit just perfectly. If you've ever worked with metal, it's really hard to get it to bend exactly the way you want it to. And so getting doors and hoods and trunk lids to fit can be a bit of a problem. But here was the fun thing. You would think that being a Japanese car company, that if there was a problem in such an area, they would have some sort of high-tech way with which to deal with this. Not true. They had a former football player that would stand there and grab the trunk lid and spring it until it fit. That was the rework for that car. Isn't that crazy? I would have expected like robots and crap. Okay, so the more stuff you've got awaiting rework, the higher your inventory is going to be. And so you might have also have increased inventory and production due to rejects. Every time that Apple comes up with a new iPhone, they order the displays. By the way, do you think Apple makes the displays for the iPhone? Do you think Apple even makes the iPhone? No, Apple farms all that stuff out. But they work with all the suppliers, and in the beginning, they order twice as many display screens as they think they're going to need. Any idea why? They break, or it's the yield process. Only about half of the displays that come out in the very beginning are usable. Now, sometimes people will actually try to track the demand for iPhones by tracking Apple's orders to display providers. And that's a stupid idea, and here's why. What do you think happens over the course of production? As they produce more and more of these screens, what do you think happens to that yield rate? Do you think they try to solve problems? I would hope so, right? In fact, if you get into any line of business, you should always be looking for continuous improvement. And 50% yield is not acceptable. And so the supplier works on that, and then as a result, even if Apple is demanding or has the same demand for their iPhones, what happens to their orders for screens? Starts to fall because they're getting a higher yield. Does that make sense? Okay, so if we see people producing too much and having too much in inventory, it may be because they've got a low yield rate. Next time, we're going to start and talk about production delays. I hope to finish inventory next time, and then that will give us the ability to have a review session. Questions? Okay, have a good Thanksgiving. Be careful.